Hello there and welcome to the Card Grotto. Today I'm using alcohol inks in 4 different ways. So first of all, I just wanted to share a couple of precautions with you in case you've never used alcohol inks before. You do want to use them in a well ventilated area. So in my case, I make sure that I have the window open that is next to me. And as you can see from the photo, I cover my entire workspace with an old sheet. I like to make sure that I completely cover my workspace because the alcohol inks can splatter quite a bit when using air spritzing tools and things like that. So obviously I just want to make sure that I don't get alcohol ink where I don't want it. I also use a craft sheet for alcohol inks. This is not recommended as you can see from the picture, mine is completely damaged and it is stained and everything like that. I personally don't mind, but you may want to use a glass mat or something like that instead. I also wear gloves when using alcohol inks. You don't particularly need to unless you happen to react to them, but I like to keep my hands nice and clean. So let's start with the first way of using alcohol inks, and that is with foil. So I have a piece of Yupo paper here, and then like I said, I'm using the craft sheet underneath, but you may want to use a glass sheet or something like that. And I'm going to be using the spritzing tool from Holtz to move the alcohol inks around. This is a spritzing tool that is made to use with distress markers, and it kind of splatters the distress marker around, but I like to use it without anything in it, and when you spritz it, you're just spritzing air onto the piece and then you can move those inks around. I've had some questions recently about if this does hurt your hands, if you have dexterity issues or anything like that with your hands. It does get a little bit tiring pushing that kind of lever thing, the kind of the round thing that I'm pushing here. It does tire your hands out. I got to about the 3rd colour and it did start hurting my hands, so it may not be a good thing to use if you do have issues with your hands. But I'm going to share with you 2 other ways that you can use moving ink around later on in the video. So here I am just adding in lots of different colours of the alcohol ink, and like I said, spritzing it with that air tool. I like to have quite harsh lines, especially for this piece in particular, and you'll see why as we go along. But I quite like that look, but if you didn't want that look and you wanted a more blended look, you could use a straw and blow through a straw, which is quite nice. I find that I got a little bit lightheaded blowing through the straw. Obviously that's just me. I would rather probably use the spritzing tool. My hand hurt a little bit more, but like I said, I don't have issues with my hands, so I don't have that issue. But it did make me a little bit faint using it with a straw. So all of the colours that I'm adding on are going to be listed in the description bar on YouTube and over on my blog. But like as you can see, I'm using lots of different colours of blues here. Just want to create a nice sort of look with all of these different blue shades, and then I'm going to go in with some darker shades here just to add in some of the gaps. And then my last colour here is the Indigo, and I really like this one because it kind of creates sort of like sticky edges, and we're going to use that to our advantage in a little while with adding the foil on top. So just adding in that colour, and then I'm going to add in some drops of the alcohol ink blending solution, and I like to do this with a little dropper bottle. I found that if I just add a tiny little bit of the alcohol ink blending solution into the dropper piece at the bottom, I can spritz that on and you get some nice droplets on there, and then those alcohol ink blending solution will move the alcohol inks around, and kind of like you would if you were creating sort of a galaxy background and you wanted to add splatters of white paint, it kind of gives the same effect. And I think this would work really nicely for a galaxy background. Actually, it kind of looks a little bit like it now. But I really like how this kind of dropper bottle works. So just adding in those drops of the alcohol ink blending solution, and then I'm going to dry that a little bit with that spritzing tool, and where those edges are that has become really sticky, which most people don't like, I'm going to use that to my advantage and add over a piece of foil. This is a sheet of silver Deco foil, and I'm using a brayer here just to make sure that I'm pushing that foil into the alcohol ink. As you can see, I've used this sheet before and I'm going to use it as many times as I possibly can with the alcohol inks. And when I remove this sheet, where the places were sticky with the alcohol ink, it's added the foil onto it, and that stuck down really nicely, and I really like this effect. Obviously you can use this with loads of different colours of different foil. I particularly like the silver with the blues. I think it works quite nicely. And then once I've let that dry for a little bit, I'm going to take a brush. This is just a soft brush. It's actually an old makeup brush. When I say old, I haven't actually used it. It was a cheap one that I bought particularly for this purpose, but it's a really nice way of just getting rid of any of that excess foil. So the next way of using alcohol inks is with mixatives, and in this case I'm using the silver metallic mixative, and for this one I'm going to be using the Copic airbrush to move the alcohol inks around. So you push that lever at the top and it expels air, and what's quite good with this one is that if you don't want to have too much air, you can just press it down a little bit, and if you want a lot of air you can press it down completely. I've got mine connected to a air compressor, but you could use the cans as well, although they could get quite expensive if you used it quite a lot. It's just something to be aware of. I didn't get that much control with this, mainly because I'm so used to using this spritzing tool, but I'm definitely going to give this more of a go because it does wear your hand out a lot less. So for this piece I've done exactly the same as the first one and just added in all of those colours on top, lots of pinks and purples. I don't particularly like how this has turned out, so I'm going to add in some drops of the alcohol ink blending solution, and I'm going to add quite a bit of that, and it kind of melds the colours together, which is nice, and I do sort of like it a little bit more as time goes on. I'm just using that spritzing tool again, like I said, because I feel like I get a little bit more control out of that. So now I'm going to add on the silver mixative, and you want to shake this really well because this is an opaque medium. There's a ball inside of that little alcohol ink bottle, and you want to make sure that you can hear that ball as you're shaking it. So I'm going to add on some small drops of this mixative, and then I've got the alcohol ink blending solution again in that dropper bottle, and I'm just going to drop some of the alcohol ink blending solution over the top, and then I'm going to go in with that spritzing tool, but you could use the Copic airbrush as well. Like I said, I get a little bit more control out of it, I think, using this way. And I'm just moving that silver mixative around. You do still get a bit of a blob of it, which personally I don't mind, but using this method of adding it on, you kind of get some of it mixing in with the colours of the alcohol ink as well, which I personally really like. So I'm going to go on and add a lot more of this silver mixative in sort of various places along this panel. So like I said, just adding in quite a bit of that alcohol ink blending solution. And then if I get a little bit too much of a blob of the silver, I can always add some alcohol ink colours over the top. And actually I really like how this came out. It kind of looks a bit like a marble effect, I think. I really quite like it. And I really like those colours, how they've blended together. So the third way of using alcohol inks today I'm going to share with you is using them with stencils. So again, I have a piece of Yupo paper here, and this time I'm going to add on some alcohol ink blending solution first. And this makes sure that the paper is really wet and it actually blends the colours a lot easier together. So I'm going to go in with the 3 shades of sort of tealy, turquoisey, aqua-y kind of shades, and then I'm just going to spritz the tool over the top, and this time I'm actually not having to press down on that tool that much because the alcohol inks move a lot easier with that blending solution. So I'm going to go in, like I said, with the 3 different shades, and I want these to sort of blend together a little bit more. So that is why I use that alcohol ink blending solution first, and you can just add some first or you can add it over the top, but as I said, it works really nicely to sort of blend those colours together. So just going in with my darkest shade here, and the paper is still quite wet at this point, but some pieces of it are dry, so I'm going to go back in with the blending solution, just move that around a little bit more. So this would be quite a good way of using that spritzing tool if you did have some issues with your hands, because you don't have to press on it so much. I've just left that piece to dry for about 10 minutes or so, and then I'm adding on the stencil over the top, and I've got an ink blending tool here with a piece of foam on the top, and I'm going to use that alcohol ink blending solution to wick away some of that alcohol ink in between the stencil. So I'm just kind of dabbing that on, and then I'm kind of, it's a little bit difficult to see on camera because I've sped this up so much, but when I push down on the blending tool, I'm kind of turning it slightly, so I'm kind of removing, like I said, a lot of that alcohol ink colour. And just because eventually this piece of foam, is going to get quite a bit inky, I'm just trying to get rid of some of that ink on there with the paper towel. So just going to go along that whole piece, removing that alcohol ink, and it's going to give a really nice pattern. Obviously, depending on which kind of stencil you use, you're going to get sort of different effects and different patterns, and some of it is going to work sort of better than others, some patterns. But I do really like how this came out. You get a really nice sort of look to that, and it just gives some added interest onto that panel. So the final way I'm going to be using alcohol inks today is with ink smooshing. So like you do with distress inks and things like that, you can do that with alcohol inks, and I think it probably works a little bit better on the craft sheet than other surfaces. But I'm just adding that alcohol ink directly onto the craft sheet, and then I'm going to pick it up with the Yupo paper. So I'm going to go in with some various shades of yellows and oranges, and then a red here at the bottom. And I'm going to go for a sort of an ombre look, and this creates more of a blended look on the actual Yupo piece. So I'm adding on some alcohol ink blending solution over the top, and then I'm going to take my piece of Yupo and I'm literally going to smush it into that colour and move it along, and then you get a really nice sort of ombre look, and like I said, the colours blend quite nicely together. I really like this for sunsets, like if you're going to use these particular colours, or if you want to create like a sea background or something like that with some blues and aquas and things. I think it works out really, really nicely. And although I'm not actually using it on the card today, I just wanted to share with you that all of that alcohol ink that's still on the sheet, you can sort of use it by adding some more alcohol ink blending solution over the top. It does get a little bit messy, which is where the gloves come into their own, but I wanted to just share that with you so you don't need to waste any of that alcohol ink. And that's how the background turned out. So to make these backgrounds into cards, I'm going to be using the Spellbinders Die of the Month kit, and this is the small Die of the Month kit from May 2018. And as you can see, there's some really nice word dies in this kit, and they're all on a line, so I thought that they would make really nice panels along with the alcohol ink backgrounds. So I've placed one of the dies onto a piece of cardstock, and I've just used some low tack tape to keep that in place. And then I'm going to run that through the Spellbinders Platinum 6 die cutting machine. So I'm just running that through, and it cuts out beautifully, so I can just remove that die, and then I'm going to remove the top piece from the bottom piece, and then the bottom piece is the piece that I'm going to use. So just removing that carefully, and as you can see, I'm going to have a really nice panel of white cardstock that I can add on to my alcohol ink backgrounds. So I've done the same thing with all of the other dies, and then I've added my alcohol ink backgrounds onto some white card bases, and then I've added foam tape onto the back of the die cut panels, and I'm using quite a thick foam tape here. I'm using foam tape as opposed to like foam sheet or anything like that, because although I want to cover the bottom piece here really well, I also want to cut little bits off so that I can add that behind the letters of the words. So then I'm just going to place that down onto my card. And I really like the combination of the white panel at the bottom and then the alcohol ink at the top. And I did get a little bit of alcohol ink onto my white piece, so I'm just using a sand eraser and then also a normal eraser just to get rid of that. And that's that card finished. I really like how it came out with that foiling on the alcohol ink at the top. And like I said, you've got a nice dark interest with the white panel at the bottom. My next card here uses the thank you die, and then that alcohol ink background that I used the Mixatives on the top. Like I said, I think that came out really quite nicely with sort of a marble look. I really like that look. My next card here is the smile die with that stenciled alcohol ink background at the top. I really like that nice pattern that stencil gives. And then my final card here is the Hello die, along with the ombre ink smooshing technique for the alcohol ink. And as it's dried, those colours have blended even more together, and I think it gives a really nice look. So that is 4 ways of using alcohol inks. I hope you've enjoyed watching. Links to the products will be in the description bar on YouTube and also over on my blog. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.